Madison Parker had bullied everyone and gotten away with it. But the new girl she mocked wasn't ordinary. She was trained, patient, and ready to make silence her weapon. The corridor smelled like cheap lockers and recycled air, the kind of scent that lived somewhere between bleach and anxiety. Madison Parker walked through it like a parade, head high, uniform immaculate, her sneakers tapping out a rhythm that made people move aside before she even spoke. She had perfected the art of command. Her laughter wasn't careless. It was choreographed. Every eye roll, every smirk, every whispered insult was a performance, rehearsed in countless hallways and fueled by the validation of followers who filmed her daily routines as if she were a celebrity. At 17, Madison wasn't just popular, she was a brand. Teachers excused her sharpness as leadership, parents admired her drive, and her peers learned quickly that survival in her orbit meant applause, or at least silence. The school folded around her authority like paper around flame. She had turned cruelty into social currency, and she spent it freely. Then came Kesha Johnson. She didn't look like much at first, a transfer student with plain clothes, hair pulled back neatly, shoes that had walked too many miles. Her eyes, though, told another story. They were alert but patient, scanning the hall not with nervousness but with a strange practiced stillness. When she moved, it was quiet. No clatter of jewelry, no loud conversations, no visible need for attention. She carried herself like someone used to observing before acting. It unsettled Madison in a way she couldn't name. Their first collision wasn't planned. Madison was showing off, surrounded by her entourage, when her knee connected sharply with Kesha's ribs near the lockers. The noise of laughter filled the corridor, bouncing off the metal like applause after a cruel joke. Everyone waited for the reaction, the tears, the confrontation, maybe even a dramatic video moment. But instead of crumbling, Kesha simply straightened. She inhaled once, deeply, the way someone centers themselves before stepping into a ring. Her face was calm. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was low but clear. "Excuse me," she said, as if she were the one who had interrupted. The crowd went quiet, confused by the lack of theatrics. Madison smirked, trying to reclaim the moment, but something had shifted. Kesha's politeness didn't sound like weakness. It felt deliberate, measured, almost like strategy. For a moment, Madison lost the script she had perfected for years. The next few days became a test. Madison began her usual campaign, petty sabotage disguised as fun. A spill of juice here, a whisper there, gum pressed into Kesha's hair, stolen notebooks replaced with laughter. Her group followed orders, their amusement masking cowardice. Each time, Kesha cleaned up with quiet efficiency. No tantrums, no tears, no social posts, only patience. It was this silence that began to gnaw at Madison. Bullies feed on reactions, and Kesha gave her nothing but composure. The other students began to watch differently. There was something about her calm that demanded attention. What nobody saw, except perhaps Ms. Williams, the gym teacher with a boxer's instincts, was how Kesha moved. During warm-ups, her steps were too balanced for an amateur, her breathing too controlled. She shifted her weight from one foot to another like someone who had been taught discipline, not just endurance. It was grace rooted in control. Ms. Williams watched from the sidelines, recognition flashing across her eyes. That girl wasn't just athletic. She was trained. Her posture, her way of measuring distance, it was muscle memory, the kind built through hours of repetition and resilience. Kesha's history was invisible, but it was there. In the careful way she folded her gym towel, the steady rhythm of her breaths, the way she never looked down. Life had already taught her to withstand blows, not just from fists, but from words. Every slight, every cruel prank was being recorded, not on a phone, but in her mind. Madison couldn't see the storm she was building. She only saw a quiet girl who refused to break. And that refusal, that unshakable calm, was more dangerous than anger. By the end of the week, a strange tension filled the air. The laughter around Madison began to sound forced. Some of her followers exchanged glances instead of joining in. And one afternoon, when gym class rolled around, the hierarchy that Madison had ruled for years started to crack. Kesha stepped onto the mat for routine sparring drills, her movements smooth, economical. Ms. Williams paused mid-whistle. The stance, the focus, the unmistakable precision of someone who had fought before. Madison noticed, too, not consciously but instinctively. For the first time, she hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, a shadow she quickly tried to bury beneath arrogance. She didn't know it yet, but the balance of power had already shifted. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who has already learned to fight battles before anyone else even realizes a war has begun. Kesha's past was a map drawn in hard edges. Detroit had taught her to rise at dawn when the streets were quiet and cold, and ambition had to be wrestled from fatigue. She learned to lace her shoes before the city even blinked awake, to push through the sting in her muscles, and to measure herself not by comfort, but by consistency. Her father's old stopwatch still sat on her dresser, a reminder that time was never a gift. It was something you fought to own. Her sister's death had been the dividing line between childhood and survival. One day there were two voices laughing in the kitchen and the next only echoes. The grief didn't fade. It hardened, shaping her into something deliberate. She found the boxing gym by accident, but it became her sanctuary. Inside those ropes, the world was simple. Pain had a rhythm, fear had form, and discipline was louder than emotion. She learned to slip punches not just in the ring, but in life, ducking insults, sidestepping pity, staying grounded while others swung wildly. Boxing wasn't just sport, it was philosophy. It taught her to conserve energy, to know when to advance and when to absorb. Less spectacle, more precision. While other kids scrolled through drama and noise, Kesha studied balance. She turned loss into motion and motion into purpose. Every hit, every breath, every silent moment after the bell, she turned them into survival lessons. Madison's cruelty came from a different education entirely. Hers was a kingdom built on applause, polished shoes, perfect selfies, and the illusion of control. She ruled the hallways with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no and meant it. Her parents donated to the school fund. Her name appeared in newsletters. Authority smiled on her, peers orbited her, and she'd mistaken attention for power. Her world ran on performance, status updates, edited photos, and unspoken hierarchies. She didn't need to be smart. She needed to be seen. Every word she spoke carried an undertone of ownership. Her followers laughed on cue, mimicking her confidence because they didn't have their own. Madison had never met resistance that didn't crumble. When Kesha arrived, quiet and unbothered, Madison saw a challenge she couldn't categorize. That made her uneasy. In Madison's world, silence was an insult, and so she did what the privileged often do when threatened. She attacked. The campaign started small. Whispers in the cafeteria, side-eyes during group work, a misplaced book here, a mocking text there. Then it grew. Fake accounts, screenshots, comments designed to sting and spread. It wasn't about truth. It was about spectacle. Madison wanted control of the narrative, and humiliation was her headline. But Kesha was built differently. She didn't flinch or fight back in public. She absorbed each blow with quiet calculation, the same way she had in the ring. Every insult was another data point, every rumor another tell. She didn't strike immediately, she studied. Her calm became her weapon. She spoke little, but when she did, people listened. Teachers started noticing the pattern, coaches too. And behind her silence, Kesha built a small, steady network of believers. Those who'd seen the same cruelty and learned to survive it quietly. The shift came slowly, then all at once. The whispers in the locker room weren't just gossip anymore, they were evidence. Screenshots began to circulate privately, captured by students who were tired of watching cruelty dress itself as confidence. The same internet that once fueled Madison's reign started to betray her. People began saving posts instead of liking them, sharing receipts instead of rumors. For the first time, Madison's control faltered. Her confidence cracked under the weight of her own performance. The teachers intervened not out of pity, but because the truth had become undeniable. Kesha didn't gloat. She didn't post victory quotes or deliver speeches. She just showed up. Every day, head high, quiet but unshaken. Her power wasn't in shouting, it was in standing. Detroit had trained her for that. Life had tested her for that. And now, standing in a high school hallway that once mocked her, Kesha reminded everyone watching, real strength doesn't need an audience. It only needs focus. And somewhere deep down, even Madison understood, this wasn't just about a fight between two girls. It was about two kinds of power, one inherited, one earned. And in the end, earned always endures. Madison called it Operation Total Humiliation. The phrase itself had a kind of cruelty disguised as creativity, the way privileged people sometimes name destruction as if it were a performance. She organized it like a general planning a victory. Private group chats, whispered rehearsals between classes, and a shared folder of edited clips ready to go viral. The target was simple, the new girl. The objective, complete social collapse. The cafeteria had been chosen carefully. It was public, loud, and filled with an audience hungry for distraction. Lunchtime always carried the buzz of competition. Who was sitting where, who was wearing what, who had fallen out of favor. That day, the air was charged differently. A quiet tension rippled between tables as the self-appointed queen of the school prepared to make her next example. Madison walked in surrounded by her usual orbit. Friends carrying phones, eyes glinting with anticipation. The camera was already rolling before the cruelty began. Kesha sat alone, a tray half finished, a book beside her plate. She noticed the shift before it began, that unnatural silence that falls when spectacle approaches. Madison didn't approach with hesitation. She approached like someone who had never learned to fear consequence. She snatched the book from the table, tipped over the tray, and smiled for the phones. The laughter that followed wasn't spontaneous. It was rehearsed, conditioned, expected. When Madison dumped Kesha's backpack and the contents scattered like a small storm of paper, pencils and personal things, the cafeteria leaned in. The single photograph, one worn edge, one image of a sister gone too soon, fluttered to the ground like an accusation. Madison's foot caught it. She lifted it, smirking. "What's this?" she asked, loud enough for the crowd. A tragic backstory? That was the moment everyone expected the breakdown. Screams, maybe tears, something viral enough to feed the algorithm of cruelty. Instead, the scene took a turn nobody could predict. Kesha stood slowly. Her expression was unreadable. Her voice, when it came, was low and perfectly steady. "Give it back." 3 words. No quiver, no plea, just command. It wasn't the volume that quieted the cafeteria. It was the authority. Something ancient, controlled, and precise lived in those syllables. The crowd froze, not out of fear but confusion. This wasn't the script they had come for. Madison blinked, thrown off her rhythm, and sneered in defense. Or what? When she shoved Kesha's shoulder, the response was instinct, emotion polished by years of training. Kesha moved like water, efficient, deliberate, final. A shift in stance, a pivot, a deflection of momentum. Madison's wrist met air, then control. In one breath, Kesha had retrieved the photo, stepped back, and released her opponent unharmed, but completely dismantled. The cafeteria erupted in gasps. There was no chaos, no screaming, no wild violence. Just a clean, disciplined assertion of boundary. The kind that teaches rather than destroys. The phones, of course, caught everything. But the footage that spread later told a different story than anyone expected. It wasn't about a fight. It was about a balance of power corrected in 3 seconds. A masterclass in restraint. The clip showed calm precision where others expected rage. Respect where others wanted spectacle. Ms. Williams, watching from the doorway, recognized what most missed. She saw the way Kesha's stance held form. The grounding of someone trained, not reactive. This was not retaliation. It was correction. She saw years of boxing discipline translated into ethics, movement distilled into message. When the clip hit social media, its tone changed the conversation. The captions that tried to mock quickly turned into discussions. "Did you see how controlled she was?" One comment read, "That's not a fight, that's composure." Madison's empire of popularity began to fracture. The followers who once clung to her power retreated. Some deleted posts. Others issued private apologies. It wasn't fear that silenced them, it was shame. They had been part of a cruelty that now looked small and cowardly against the calm of one girl reclaiming her dignity. The fallout was immediate. The principal's office filled with parents. The video, already shared thousands of times, made containment impossible. Madison's father, a man accustomed to smoothing scandal with money and influence, found himself powerless. His daughter's image, frozen in the frame of a viral lesson, was beyond repair. The same social system that had crowned her now dismantled her piece by piece, post by post. Kesha didn't boast. She didn't post. She didn't explain. After retrieving the photograph, she returned to her table, placed it back into her wallet, and sat down. The calm continued, like nothing monumental had occurred. She finished her lunch quietly. In the days that followed, teachers spoke in low tones about the incident. But what lingered wasn't fear. It was respect. Students began to understand that there were limits even to the untouchable. Madison had learned it the hardest way possible. That privilege collapses in the face of prepared resolve. Her empire wasn't conquered by chaos, but by composure, a power that no amount of status could replicate. For Kesha, it wasn't revenge. It was restoration, of peace, of dignity, of self. And for everyone watching, it was a reminder. Strength, when truly trained, doesn't shout. It acts, and then walks away. Madison's throne crumbled faster than anyone expected. It didn't happen in a single dramatic moment. It dissolved piece by piece in whispers and glances, in the quiet unfollowing that happens when fear loses its power. The same students who had once worshipped her confidence now found it brittle, even embarrassing. Her laugh no longer carried authority. It sounded nervous, hollow. Those who had recorded the cafeteria incident deleted the footage from their phones, but not from their minds. Some felt guilt twist in their stomachs. Others just decided it was safer to disappear from her orbit before the backlash reached them. Madison, once the architect of humiliation, became its subject. Teachers who had previously excused her behavior stopped looking the other way. Her name began appearing in staff meetings, not as an example of leadership, but as a problem to address. When her father tried to intervene, emails, phone calls, subtle threats, he found the system uncooperative for the first time. Influence had limits when evidence was public and undeniable. The video was no longer just gossip. It was proof. At home, the illusion of control fractured. Her parents, embarrassed by the attention, imposed restrictions that felt foreign to her. Grounded weekends, revoked privileges, mandatory counseling sessions. The therapy was supposed to be character rehabilitation, but to Madison, it felt like exposure. The counselor's questions cut too close, about insecurity, about image, about the pressure of being adored. She had built her self-worth on dominance, and now, without it, she found herself adrift. The spotlight that once felt warm now burned. Meanwhile, Kesha went back to her rhythm. The noise of viral fame never reached her the way it reached others. She didn't celebrate or repost clips. She didn't offer commentary. Instead, she woke up early, laced her sneakers, and returned to training. Her body knew the language of repetition. Jab, breathe, pivot, reset. Each motion was its own meditation. A reminder that real power came from discipline, not applause. In the evenings, she practiced in the dim light of the living room, the rhythm of her punches echoing softly off the walls. Her mother sometimes watched from the doorway, quietly proud but too wise to interrupt. The victory, if it could be called that, wasn't about dominance. It was about reclamation. Kesha had survived a system designed to reward cruelty and rewritten its rules through control and grace. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Coach Miller reached out to old contacts in Detroit, the mentors who had seen Kesha train years ago, and spoke about her resilience. Word spread. A scholarship program for young athletes from underrepresented backgrounds took interest. Ms. Williams, who had recognized Kesha's technique in the cafeteria, nominated her for a leadership and discipline program that emphasized integrity in sports. For Kesha, the recognition wasn't about fame. It was about momentum, proof that patience and principle could open doors faster than rage. She started helping younger students at the gym, teaching them how to control their breathing, how to move their bodies through pressure. She didn't talk about Madison or the incident. She talked about focus, about turning fear into form. Madison's world, by contrast, grew smaller. The friends who once filled her phone with constant messages stopped replying. The group chat she'd used to coordinate her operations fell silent, then vanished entirely. At school, eyes that once looked at her with admiration now looked through her. The counselors called it social consequence. Madison called it isolation. The school itself felt the shift. What had once been an unspoken culture of hierarchy began to crack. Administrators, shaken by how easily cruelty had flourished under their noses, launched policy reviews. They brought in workshops on empathy, digital responsibility, and conflict management. Teachers were trained to recognize early signs of targeting, not just the loud incidents, but the quiet buildup of humiliation that often went unnoticed. Students started speaking up. Those who had once been silent witnesses began documenting bullying instead of laughing at it. The cafeteria, once a theater for cruelty, became something more balanced. Conversations about accountability started happening in classrooms, in hallways, in parent meetings. The 3 seconds of Kesha's controlled reaction became a case study. A moment replayed not for entertainment, but for education. Over time, even Madison began to understand. Counseling sessions softened her resistance. She began to see how her confidence had been armor for fear, the fear of being invisible, of not mattering unless she stood on someone else's back. It wasn't redemption overnight, but recognition had to begin somewhere. For Kesha, the victory remained quiet. She didn't need Madison's apology to move forward. She had already done that by standing her ground, by refusing to become what the world expected her to be. She had transformed pain into purpose and reaction into example. The school carried that example long after the cameras moved on. Policies changed, students remembered, and the hierarchy that once seemed immovable now felt negotiable. In the cafeteria, where it had all unfolded, there was a new kind of silence, one born not of fear but of respect. And for the first time, the community understood that courage isn't loud, cruelty isn't strength, and the smallest moment of calm resistance can reshape an entire culture. Months later, Kesha stood in a room that did not feel like victory, but like the beginning of something earned. The sunlight caught the edges of the scholarship letters spread across the table, the official seals and signatures, proof that discipline, not drama, had brought her here. Her backpack held a coach's formal recommendation and a few carefully folded essays she had written late at night. The walls of the guidance office were lined with pictures of students who had gone on to college, but this moment felt different. For Kesha, it was not about escape. It was about proof that pain could be translated into purpose. The hallway outside was quieter now. Students moved with less swagger, more awareness. The echo of laughter was no longer a weapon, but a background sound of normal teenage life. The cruel energy that had once thrived in corners and stairwells had softened. Teachers walked with more alertness. Eyes that once looked past discomfort now paused when they saw unease. The school had changed in ways that didn't always make headlines but mattered in every conversation. Every choice to speak up or step back. When Kesha stood before the new students to give her short speech, there was no dramatics in her tone. Her voice was even, her expression calm. "Respect," she said, "is earned, not demanded." The room stayed still. The simplicity of the statement made it land harder than any performance. She didn't need to explain what she meant. The students had heard the story, seen the clip, felt the ripple effect. They knew that the words came from someone who had survived being a target and had chosen restoration over retaliation. Her speech lasted less than 5 minutes. But in that time, she managed to condense a truth that most adults take decades to articulate. She spoke about patience, about how real strength isn't the volume of your voice but the steadiness of your stance. She told them that anger could destroy, but it could also instruct if you learned to guide it. Her words weren't rehearsed. They were lived, and that's why they worked. Madison sat in the back row. She didn't hide, but she didn't draw attention either. The arrogance that had once shaped her every move was gone. In its place was something quieter, awareness, maybe even regret. She had learned the hard way that power without empathy is temporary, and that humiliation, once public, has a way of reshaping your sense of self. Her days were now filled with smaller victories, completed assignments, consistent attendance, and the rare but growing moments when she helped instead of hurt. It wasn't redemption yet, but it was motion in the right direction. Teachers saw the shift too. They'd made space for something schools often overlook: repair. When harm happened now, it wasn't swept away or punished into silence. It was talked about, addressed, and transformed into policy. The administration had created systems, anonymous reporting, restorative meetings, mentorship programs that made cruelty less survivable in the shadows. The school was still imperfect, but it was learning. For Kesha, that was enough. Her scholarship wasn't a trophy to hang on a wall or post online. It was a bridge. It represented a chance to build a life that didn't have to be defined by resistance. She still trained, still woke early, still hit the bag, but the rhythm was different now. The punches weren't against ghosts anymore. They were against limits she had yet to test. At assemblies, she often repeated one line that had come to define her philosophy. You don't have to be loud to be dangerous. You only need to be relentless. The phrase spread quietly through classrooms, written in notebooks and on locker doors. It became a kind of code for those who had been silent too long. The final image is not one of revenge, but of balance. A student who learned to wield discipline with care. A bully who learned that consequence could teach as much as pain. A school that learned to see not just the spectacle of conflict, but the slow, quiet work of healing that follows it. In that transformation lies the real victory, not the moment Kesha won, but the moment everyone around her started to understand what winning truly means. If this moved you, do one small thing. Share this story with someone who needs to know that quiet strength changes outcomes. Hit subscribe for more real stories of dignity, courage, and the moments that make bullies rethink everything. And drop a comment. Who was a quiet fighter in your life?